Recently, UN Women has officially announced the global report, Progress of the World's Women 2015-2016, Transforming Economies, Realizing Rights, Addressing Existing Problems in the Global Economies and Society, offering specific solutions for the governments to ensure justice, equality for women and men worldwide. This report points out the fact that even educated women are still struggling to find jobs. In many countries in the Middle East, South Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, and Southern Europe are facing the highest unemployment rate in history. And in other areas where women do have jobs, women are paid less than men, 24% in average. 83% of women working for meager wages, unstable work and small-scale agriculture, promoting the rights of women not only generates more employment and income for women, but also supports the development of society fairly and stably.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sharing Vietnam on VTC 10 Net Viet. On the occasions of the recent release of the report from UN Women Global about the progress of World's Women 2015-2016, we shall know more about the current situations of the economic rights for women in Vietnam with the representatives of UN Women in Vietnam, Ms. Shoko Ishikawa. Thank you, Ms. Shoko, so much for joining Sharing Vietnam today. Progress of World's Women, Transforming Economic, Realizing Rights, provide a timely, action-oriented for the Beijing Platform Plus 20 for countries. So how could this report help become a guideline for Vietnam?
The research was done looking at data and statistics from different regions of the world, and it analyzes the overall trend of how economic policy has been impacting on women's lives. And what it shows is that although the world economy has been growing and also there has been crises, in general, women's economic participation, women's benefit from the economic growth has been very uneven, and it provides a series of recommendations that are very relevant to Vietnam in terms of how to make sure that women are able to be part of the growth of the economy in terms of job opportunities, in terms of the social services that they can access that would then provide them the opportunities to also earn a better income. There needs to be efforts by the government made to create decent work for women. There also is a need for governments to look at how they are spending on their social policies, whether the social services spending is enough, and whether the spending is in the areas that equally benefit women and men.
There's also the fact that despite the improvement of the world's economy, the women's rights and equality in the economic context not only has not been achieved but also been worsened than before. So what do you think are the reasons behind the fact?
It is partly the lack of awareness and understanding of economic policymakers on what is actually supporting the economic growth of nations, of the world. And for productive work to grow, actually there's a lot of reproductive work that women are shouldering, supporting the family and the workers to be able to go back to work every day. Women are the ones that are supporting the preparation of the food, caring of the children, so that people could then go back into the productive work. But that linkage between the reproductive work and the productive work is not well understood. So if you do not deal with the burden of the reproductive work, then women cannot participate in the productive work, left to be in these vulnerable jobs, unstable jobs that are flexible for the women so that they could balance the work and the family, but they don't pay enough for the women. Although I would say that in Vietnam, you do have a high rate of women participating in the labor force. In fact, 73% of women are engaged in the labor market. But what is similar in Vietnam to the overall trend is the fact that women's employment, women's jobs have mostly been in the informal sector and in vulnerable employment. So for example, 69% of women in Vietnam are engaged in the informal work, which means that they do not have the benefit of social protection and insurance. They do not have paid leave in terms of maternity leave or any kind of sick leave. They also have much lower wages than people that are engaged in formal employment.
Long Biên Market at 12 midnight. It is the biggest fruit market in northern Vietnam, clearly delineates the harsh life of working labor. Here, the women migrants from many locals such as Vĩnh Phúc, Hưng Yên, undertaking wide range of jobs from trading to porter. Meager, unstable wages, just enough for the day, are the general conditions of the female workers in this area.
Trước thì xuống để đi gánh, sau đó thì có một tí gọi là dư giả thì mua thêm được cái xe để mà kéo. Có những cái thùng hàng Nha Trang lên tới 60-70 cân thì bọn em nếu mà làm một mình thì bọn em vẫn phải bê cố.
Trong một ngày đi chợ mệt nhọc từ lúc 3 giờ sáng và cho đến 12 giờ. Và từ 12 giờ tôi nghỉ đến 1 giờ thì là có công việc gì là mọi người mượn thì tôi sẽ làm.
During last year visit of UN Women Global's Executive Director, Ms. Pham Zai shared her commitment of UN Women to protect the economic interests of women and encourage the government of Vietnam issued and consolidate the laws, regulations promoting gender equality in society. Women in Long Biên whole-scale markets are typically just a sketch ply of millions of women in Vietnam, while relying in informal, precarious works with no opportunity to change the conditions of their lives.
UN Women have studied about the economic situations of women in Vietnam. So what are your assessment about the overall economic opportunities there are for the women in Vietnam? Is there any positive changes?
On the positive side, of course, as I mentioned, the labor force participation has grown. So there are more women that are working. Some of the wage gaps has been shrinking. Now the government has put in place a paternity leave policy and really encouraging men to take that paternity leave, even though it's very short, but start taking that and share that responsibility at home.
Is there any difference between the rural areas and the urban areas in terms of economic opportunities for women?
There certainly is. The Vietnamese economy is still much dependent on agriculture. The majority actually of agriculture workers are women, and they do not get enough access to the kinds of extension services, the training opportunities that enable them to actually transition from agricultural work to non-agricultural work that could perhaps give them a better income. And for example, we see that in the ethnic minority areas where there are not sufficient varieties of crops that give them enough income, or alternative income opportunities for girls. A lot of women and girls in ethnic minority communities are not engaged in the kind of wage work opportunities that are available in the urban areas, leading to situations such as child marriage, as well as issues of vulnerability to trafficking, also migration into, again, very insecure jobs in the urban areas. And so there is a need to think of economic opportunities for women in the rural areas and the ethnic minority communities.
And what are the ways that we can tackle into these situations, taking into account various roles of the stakeholders such as the public, the families, and the public policies?
Well, so in terms of government policies, first and foremost, there is a need to look at creating decent job opportunities for women. There is also a need to look at enhancing the training opportunities for women so that they can then really take advantage of the new jobs that are perhaps opening up in the different kinds of industries. As the economy and the trade focus of Vietnam shifts from low-paid labor-intensive factory work to more high-tech and knowledge-based work. Third, there's also a need to look at policies and programs that will reduce the unpaid care burden of women. And by that, it could be rural road infrastructure projects that will reduce the time that women spend collecting wood for fire or collecting water. It could be child care centers that are accessible to low-income women and also migrant women, so that they could engage in wage labor and productive labor. And I think in Vietnam, you want to also be starting to think about elderly care, because Vietnam has a rapidly growing aging population. Older people will need taking care of, and that's going to be falling most likely on the shoulders of women, creating disadvantages for them to be engaged in full-time jobs that will give them a decent income. Rather than that, they would maybe require something more flexible where they could take care of their older parents but also have some job. So these kind of social policies need to be put in place so that it doesn't fall on the shoulders of women. Also is looking at social protection programs, social insurance programs, allowing social insurance benefits also to informal sector workers, which predominantly are women, and in that way giving them the income security. So there are various ways that the social sector, the government could engage, but I also think that the private sector has a role in terms of looking at their business practices and looking at how, for example, their supply chains are working and whether there are women businesses in their supply chains, whether there could be a way of engaging more women entrepreneurs in their supply chain. And then finally, at community and family level, I think the sharing of the care responsibilities at home, where men will also engage more in childcare in the family work, so that women could then be the ones that can be working.
Thank you, Ms. Shoko, so much for joining Sharing Vietnam today. And that's the end for Sharing Vietnam today. Thank you so much for watching us. Hope that from this show we will have to know more about the barriers there are for women in terms of economic, and how can the society helps to improve on that situations. Any questions and recommendation, please email to sharingvietnam@netvietTV.net. Thank you and see you again.